Hey there and welcome to SI Now. It's Wednesday, November 9th, and I'm Ryan Aselta. History was made just last week when the Chicago Cubs ended their 108-year drought, winning the World Series. Well, last night's presidential election has left millions of Americans with many of the same emotions that were felt by Cubs and Indians fans. Shock, elation, disappointment. Americans are experiencing it all right now. We here at Sports Illustrated know we are not a political forum, but we also know that sports play a very important role in the lives of Americans on a day like today. So let's begin that conversation with our first guest, Time Magazine senior writer covering sports, Sean Gregory. And Sean, after a campaign season, an election like we saw last night, what is the role sports can have for Americans, regardless of whether their candidate won or lost the election?
I mean, the escapism of sports. It's interesting, you know, there's been a lot of talk about the NFL ratings this year, for example, and one reason they've declined, according to many people, is that people are so interested in politics. And at the same time, sports has become more of a forum for athletes to express their political views. You know, we've seen that especially with Colin Kaepernick and kneeling. So more athletes today in social media are comfortable engaging. So you're seeing a little bit of both. You're seeing, you know, what bothers some people is they want to go to sports for an escape, but they can't get the politics out of it, and that kind of confuses and angers a lot of people too.
Clearly, after what we saw last night, we are a nation divided. But what's interesting about sports, I think, Sean, is you see these fans, many of them who don't have the same beliefs, may stand on separate sides of the aisle. They're going to come together over the next few days, this weekend. They're going to wear the same jerseys, pour into the same stadiums, and root for the same teams. What does that say about the role sports has in our society here?
Yeah, at the same time, it's a huge unifier. And you know, you mentioned the Cubs. I mean, across Chicago and Illinois, I'm sure there's folks that go blue, folks that go red, and everybody unites over Chicago Cubs blue. So it's a unique situation. You know, football in particular, college football, NFL football. It's this mass gathering of folks, many with different views. And yeah, I think now you'll start to see people, now that the election is over, even today we saw President Obama and Hillary Clinton say we have to move on. Very positive, not looking back. I think we're going to see more, you know, sports getting back to normal, forget about this stuff, and you know, going from there. And maybe the NFL, and maybe NFL ratings will bump up a little bit too.
Yeah, do you think it's going to take some time? Did you kind of see that as an immediate, that people are ready to move on from this election and kind of divert their attention to something else?
It's interesting, and it's funny how NFL ratings are will become a barometer of that. I think, you know, if you would have asked me last night, I would say maybe, you know, as we saw that Donald Trump was probably going to win, and that was an emotional thing on both sides, I would have said maybe not. But I think today the rhetoric from Hillary Clinton in her concession speech, from President Obama on his speech on the White House lawn, I think will push folks forward, folks who are very upset that Donald Trump is president, to kind of go about their lives. And maybe that's not as much watching political shows now on Sunday nights, it's watching the NFL again.
You wrote the cover story for Time Magazine in September on Colin Kaepernick, his stance on social issues. Kaepernick made the announcement yesterday that he had decided not to vote. Mm-hmm. A guy who wrote this story and got to see Kaepernick and the issues he stood for. How can a guy who wanted his voice heard on so many important social and political issues decide to completely disregard the privilege as an American to cast his vote? Yeah,
I would have personally preferred to see him exercise his duty to vote. But his whole stance has been, you know, America is a place where we have a right to pretty much express ourselves how we want to. And he personally thought expressing himself by not voting is a form of self-expression. I think some of the military folks who engaged with him and got behind him would say, well, we fought for your right to vote. You know, the right to vote, the duty to vote is such a fundamental thing. Kind of protesting in that way by not voting, I think, is a little maybe confusing for folks who are kind of engaging with him.
Do you think his message or his stance takes a hit or loses a little bit of credibility by taking?
Yeah, I think it becomes a little more frivolous when you say you're just not going to vote. You know what I mean? I think, you know, you have to make hard choices, and you can vote right. You can vote different ways. Third parties, writing candidate. If you don't, and he's been very vocal that he does not like either candidate, which is fine. But again, so many folks have fought for the right of Americans and the duty and the privilege for Americans to vote. So for him To kind of dismiss that, I think, if you're asking like how it kind of all plays out for him, I think it would have been better in his interests more. He would have been better served by choosing to vote.
Many athletes over the last couple months, especially last night, expressed their opinion on the election, the campaign on social media, obviously. As the results started to pour in, so did the tweets from players from all different sports around the country. Now, many of these athletes have opposing views, Sean, yet they're going to come together starting today as teammates. What does that say about the forum of sports, where these guys may have completely different political beliefs? They know the guy sitting across from them in that locker room may have been very vocal about those beliefs. You see them on Twitter, yet that's the same guy you need to stand next to, have his back. He's your brother in arms, so to speak, and then try to win a ball game this week.
Yeah, you're living together in such close quarters. So yeah, they're like, you see yesterday when some folks went to, some of the TV networks went to polling stations, and you saw husband and wife with different views, and but that's how kind of in sports, you're living with these folks all the time. I think in the NFL, the way it's played out is really interesting. If you look, I think, a lot of Trump supporters, a lot of Clinton supporters, and I think that's where there was more tension maybe within NFL locker rooms, because I think you see both extremes in the NFL locker rooms, whereas the NBA, I think you're more likely, it's a more progressive league, I think you're more likely to see Hillary Clinton support. So in the NFL, teams have had to grapple with this, and there was one encouraging text from one NFL player who kind of posted on Twitter a text he got from a teammate saying, you know what, I'm glad what means more to me than anything is our friendship. And so it was a nice little show of unity at a time where there's so much division. So much division,
and the next few days should be interesting as we hopefully sports brings us some normalcy this weekend as those games kick off. College football, professional football, basketball, hockey, brings us back to a little bit of normalcy. Sean Gregory, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right, we're going to move on now to the NFL as Week 10 gets underway tomorrow night when the Ravens host the Browns. Our next guest is a former NFL front office executive who's been with multiple teams around the league. You can now see him giving his insights on many of Fox Sports programs. Michael Lombardi joins us. And Michael, kind of strange, concerning times for the NFL right now. The league ratings have been in decline, and Monday night's Bills-Seahawks game was the lowest rated Monday night game since 2007. Many players, they're blaming the league. What do you think? What do you attribute the declining ratings to?
I didn't go to Syracuse, and I'm not really that TV savvy. I only really know much about football. But I think oftentimes, when you see quarterbacking play not as well, look, we've lost Peyton Manning. There's a lot of good teams that have lost quarterbacks. So I think a little bit quarterbacking play, I think sometimes the officiating gets in the way of itself, and the flow of the game doesn't always seem to go as according to plan. But, football's resilient, just like the entertainment business resilient. And I think as we move into November and December, as the games get more meaningful, more powerful, and better executed, I think the fans will certainly resonate.
You mentioned the referees. Some questionable calls have been a strong theme kind of hanging over the league so far this season. The latest came Monday night with Richard Sherman's play during a Bills field goal. As a front office executive, how do you deal with a situation when you maybe feel your team has been wronged by a call or lack of call in a game?
Well, you kind of, calls go either way. And, sometimes you're the beneficiary of calls, sometimes you're not. And look, I worked 10 years for the Raiders, and, it was always us against the world mentality inside that building because of the calls that have historically gone against the Raiders. So I think when you get too caught up in the calls and that becomes more of an excuse, I think it's never the call that hurts you. It's always something else. There's other things that go into the game, and that's what you need to focus on as an executive. What else occurred in the game? Certainly, really the biggest misconception in that game, the biggest mistake in that game, not misconception, was that when the referee stood over the ball, he should have reset the 25. He cost the Bills 3 points, and ultimately at the end of the game, they could be kicking the field goal to be tied. But I think what Buffalo needs to do is look at themselves and see where they can improve their football team. They gave a valiant effort. I think Tyrod Taylor proved that within the right system and scheme offensively that he can execute and he can do very well. And when you just focus on the officials, you lose sight of the game. And I think most importantly for an executive is after a game, you have to be able to determine why you won, why you lost, and what actually did happen in the game. And usually it's not about the officials.
All right, we're just about a little over halfway through the season of this NFL season. The Cowboys have been one of the biggest stories of the NFL season. Dak Prescott has led Dallas to 7 straight wins, while Tony Romo is just about healthy enough to return to the field. How do you, as a front office executive, handle that type of situation with a successful rookie and a veteran who feels maybe his job has been taken from him?
Well, I think Tony hasn't played in so long. I think if Tony would have played the entire season in 15, and you would have been able to see him. But Tony hasn't been able to prove his durability to anyone, even though I think Tony's a tremendous player, and I have great respect for him. What happens here is you need to be able to show in practice that he can take a hit, in practice that he can execute, and he's not going to get hurt again. What we're seeing here is a fairly significant track record of him not being able to be durable. And I think as an executive, I think you just clearly keep playing the hot hand, keep playing Dak Prescott. He's done nothing to tell you he's not a good player. And then I think what you have to do is find a way to get Tony Romo some playing time, maybe later in the game. It would have been ideal against the Cleveland Browns last week if he could have been healthy enough to go in there and get some reps and kind of get his feet underneath him, because right now he's not equipped to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. He hasn't played in a long, long time.
All right, over in the AFC, the Patriots have established themselves once again as the cream of the crop. Despite losing Tom Brady for the first 4 weeks of the season, you worked in New England's front office. What is it about Bill Belichick that allows him and this franchise to continue to win regardless of which players Bill has or doesn't have on the football field?
Well, I think Bill subscribes to the Charlie Munger adage. It's called the law of aversion. And the first thing the Patriots do is ask themselves the fundamental question: how do we avoid losing? And that's the way they set up their game plan each week. What do we have to eliminate so we don't lose the game? And usually that comes down to turning the ball over, mistakes in the kicking game, penalties in the kicking game, penalties in general, and not being able to execute. And I think that's where the Patriots really gain an advantage in the NFL. They never beat themselves. They allow the opponent to beat them. And usually the opponent makes mistakes and costs them the game. And I think the way they set it up, and then they have the brilliance of the great Tom Brady and an offensive system that's been over time has really been productive. This year with Blunt being able to run the football effectively, it gives them another dimension. Last year there was no run game in New England, which really ultimately was the reason why they couldn't get to the Super Bowl. So I think there's a lot of dynamics that go into the formula for success for the Patriots. But I think ultimately it comes down to they don't beat themselves, some other team has to beat them.
All right, you can catch Michael's insight on many of FS1's programs, as well as on the new Make Me Smarter Football podcast. That, of course, can be heard on iTunes. Michael Lombardi, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
All right, now to a very big weekend right here in New York City, where UFC will make its debut at Madison Square Garden. Our Maggie Gray recently caught up with former fighter turned MMA analyst Kenny Florian to talk about a huge night in the Octagon, UFC 205 on Saturday night.
When I watch a fight, sometimes I can't even tell where it is. It could be in Brazil, it could be in Las Vegas, it could be in Australia. Why is New York so important?
It's important because of the rich history of combat sports. You know, the original Madison Square Garden, and I think the one after that, was built for combat sports. It was built for boxing. And this is kind of considered the mecca of the fighting world. And to finally have the UFC in New York is just huge for the sport. It is kind of, it's the cherry, on the cake. And I think for so many of the fighters, this is where you want to be. This is where you want to be fighting, and what a card we have this weekend.
Conor McGregor said he wanted to fight Eddie Alvarez. Yeah. He got that wish. He said he didn't want to do as much press leading up to his bouts. He was granted that wish. Mm-hmm. How much leverage does he have right now?
Conor McGregor has a lot of leverage. He's a guy who obviously moves the needle. He's the biggest star in our sport right now. And when you generate that much money, when you have that many people who want to see you fight, you kind of call your own shots, or at least you got to give a guy leeway to be able to call those shots. And I think Conor McGregor has done an insane amount of media leading up to some of those fights, which took away from his focus in other fights, perhaps the first Diaz fight, even in the Mendes fights. I mean, he was traveling cross-country on fight week. I don't know of any fighter who would ever do that. But I think Conor is realizing that it does take its toll on your focus. It does take its toll physically on you, especially as you're cutting weight on fight week. I think Conor is very focused for this fight, and he realizes how important every fight is.
You are a former fighter. You talk to a lot of fighters right now. Take the temperature. Are they okay with McGregor having this much power?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not, especially considering, he's already the world champion of the featherweight division. He's trying to become the champion of the 155-pound division, and all the 145-pounders are saying, hey, I want my shot. Where's Conor McGregor? Let's do this. And obviously everyone at 155 are saying Conor doesn't deserve to fight for the belt here. He hasn't fought at 155 in the UFC. Why does he get to jump over all the, great contenders in that division? Well, Conor is the biggest name in the sport. He's already beaten who a lot of people consider the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, in Jose Aldo. So he is deserving of that shot against Eddie Alvarez.
Very interesting. He went up to welterweight to fight Nate Diaz. I mean, that's a significant jump even for him. Is there anything he can learn from that experience that he'll apply to Alvarez?
You know what? There is a lot that he can learn. First of all, that he can go 5 hard rounds against a 170-pounder named Nate Diaz. Now, that guy has an iron chin. He's a very good-sized 170-pounder, traditionally 155 pounds, but big for 155. So I think that's going to give him a lot of confidence, knowing that he can go 5 hard rounds against one of the most durable fighters in UFC history.
Toss-up question for you. Who's had a greater influence on the UFC, Conor McGregor or Ronda Rousey?
Ooh, geez, that's a great question. Maybe Ronda Rousey, I think, probably because of all the attention that she's garnered from celebrities and her being in movies. I think maybe her impact is a little bit bigger. I don't know. There hasn't been anyone as active as Conor McGregor. There hasn't been anyone who has done all those things that they said they would do like Conor McGregor. It's close, but I guess I'll give the edge to Ronda.
All right, there you go. Kenny Florian, love seeing you on UFC Tonight. FS1, it's a great pleasure to meet you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, in the NFL, it's never too early to start looking ahead to next year, especially if you're a team like the Cleveland Browns. SI writer Chris Burke joins us now to take a look at the 2017 NFL Draft. And Chris, Browns are currently winless, the front-runner to land that #1 overall pick. What do you think? Will Cleveland use that #1 pick, if they were to get it, on a quarterback?
I mean, I think it's looking less and less likely because I think they're pretty happy with what with what they've gotten from Cody Kessler since he's had to step in and start there. But I think they also are looking at this class, and, it's not one where we've necessarily seen a quarterback like last year where Carson Wentz really played his way into one of those top spots. We haven't necessarily seen a quarterback do that this year. So they're sitting at 1. It's sort of similar to a couple years ago when Jadeveon Clowney was in a lot of books, the clear #1 pick. He went #1 over some quarterbacks, and I think we might see the same things happen with Myles Garrett here. Just add a really, really good defensive prospect at the top and either wait on quarterback for later in the draft or for the following year.
And when it comes to the quarterbacks, I know you're not thrilled with the overall class. Which college QB, though, has the best chance of maybe sneaking into the top 10 or top 5 of the draft?
I think at this point it's probably Deshaun Kaiser from Notre Dame, and again, kind of hedge your bet on all this because with all these guys that we might be talking about, it's been a little up and down. And Kaiser has started the season great, had that incredible game against Texas, and has sort of gone through the ebbs and flows with his team this year and had some really tough outings. So, you're kind of projecting it out, hoping it all comes together, but I don't think there's anything set in stone. But in terms of what you want, what the NFL specifically wants in a quarterback, he's a guy that has experience, has a lot of control of that offense, good arm, good height, can get out of the pocket and run. So he checks off a lot of boxes. It's just the consistency hasn't been there, which he's not alone at that position.
Now, in your recent mock draft 2.0, you have a lot of defensive players going early in the draft. What's the strongest position overall in this year's draft class?
I think cornerback looks really strong right now, and had several cornerbacks in that mock from a couple weeks ago. And I think we could see, as was the case last year, you could have a couple of those guys pushing up even into the top 10. And, Quincy Wilson from Florida was the highest guy off the board there. But I think I wouldn't be surprised to see 5, 6, 7 cornerbacks go in round 1 because it's such a strength and a lot of variations of guys depending on what you're looking for. There are sort of the smaller, quicker cornerbacks like a Jordan Lewis from Michigan. There's the bigger, more physical guys like Quincy Wilson, like Sidney Jones from Washington. So no matter what teams are looking for at that position, what criteria they want to meet, they can find someone who's round one worthy.
How about wide receivers? You have Clemson's Mike Williams going in the top 10. Is there another receiver that's someone else at that position that fans should kind of be keeping their eye on?
I actually really like Corey Davis from Western Michigan. I think we have positional rankings coming out next week. I think he's going to be our number one ranked receiver, and he's had a great career, great season for Western Michigan, which is a top 25 team now, and runs really good routes and is physical on the outside, can move inside and play some slot as sort of an oversized mismatch type there. So I think he's someone that maybe is in that round one mix for sure, maybe pushes Williams at the top. And you can kind of go down that list too, a wide receiver. Another guy that I don't know that he's necessarily under the radar anymore because his name's kind of been floating since the start of the year, but Cooper Kupp from Eastern Washington is a small school, small program guy that isn't exactly what I just described in Corey Davis, but a lot of ways is similar. He knows how to create separation, can high point balls and win them in the air, good route runner, moves around a lot in that offense. So that's a name that's sort of bookmarked for maybe the end of round one into round two, someone that maybe people haven't seen a whole lot of.
All right, last thing, only a few weeks left on the college football schedule. Is there a player you can see really improving his draft stock with a strong finish to this season?
Well, I think going back to the quarterback spot first and foremost, I mentioned Kaiser. I think Deshaun Watson's one of the other names in there for the first quarterback off the board and planning to go pro at the end of this year. Obviously, has been an exceptional college football quarterback the last couple of years, but again, just has been inconsistent this year. Too many turnovers. He's not reading defenses the way you'd want to see a quarterback that's had that much experience read defenses. The system's not necessarily, a perfect fit to what a lot of NFL teams want to do. So, and they're going to be playing some big games down the stretch here. They look like they may be headed for the playoffs again. If he really can show up these last few weeks, I think that would help him immensely. And then a position that we flip to the other side, we talked about strong positions. The weak position this year, without question, is offensive tackle. And I think Roderick Johnson from Florida State is a guy you kind of circle there because he was coming into the year thought of as maybe a round one type player. And now he's played so poorly that it looks like he could head back to school just to try and elevate his stock again. So if he can finish with a few good games here and look like he's making that progress, maybe he can bounce back into the top 4 or 5 of what's been kind of a rough class.
All right, you can check out the Mock Draft 2.0 as well as the upcoming positional rankings. It's all going to be on SI.com. Chris Burke, thanks for being with us, man.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
Well, this past weekend, thousands of runners tackled the streets of New York for the New York City Marathon. Ever wonder what it looks and feels like to make that 26.2-mile journey? As Maggie Gray found out, you don't even have to lace up the sneakers to get a virtual look at being a marathoner.
Sports Illustrated, Life VR, and Cyberlink have partnered up. These three forces are giving consumers the chance of experiencing virtual reality through the eyes of a marathon runner. This year, we got to live vicariously through Alex Christensen, a 20-time marathon participant, running in the New York Marathon for the 10th time on Sunday. And Alex is good enough to join me now. So how did you get chosen for this very prestigious journey?
I was approached by Cyberlinks, who were doing a partnership with Sports Illustrated, and they asked me to use the Samsung Gear 360 camera to kind of capture the images of the marathon through a marathoner's eyes.
Okay, let's see the contraption that you wore to document what was going on through the 5 boroughs and through this marathon. Now, this is basically a backpack?
Yeah, so it's a harness which we put together, our team, Tim and I, and had basically tested it out a few times and went through a few iterations to come up with it. Did it
change your marathon running experience at all?
I was surprised. It was, it's very light. It's the camera's about 5 ounces, but it wasn't till the later miles that I started to notice it.
Tell us a little bit about this camera. It looks a little like an old school webcam.
Yeah, and I was surprised by it because, you know, initially it moved around a lot, and you know, it was pretty cool how we were able to get the stabilization and everything to work. But people would, as I was running along, would refer to it as the eye, and I heard some pretty funny comments as I ran.
What were you hoping that the users would come away with by, you know, keeping this pack and that eye on your back throughout the 26.2 miles?
You know, for me personally, I've really loved running the marathon over the years, and you know, it's, I think, just a nice, special way to kind of capture the, you know, the spirit of the marathon and just share with others who either haven't run it or have run it and want to maybe relive that experience. And it's, you know, I'm someone who's pretty interested in technology, so it's just a fun way to kind of try out a new technology and be involved in that way.
As we're seeing your footage roll through here, do you feel like this accurately captures what you were going through in your 10th New York City Marathon?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty tired at this point. It's right near the finish line.
So.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. So has CyberLink asked you to do any more events, whether it be running or otherwise? Because now you're basically their guinea pig, right?
You know, I'd love to. It was a lot of fun, and I have some friends who have done some other sort of tech experiments with them. So potentially down the road, I'm not sure.
That's really exciting. Well, I would say congratulations on not only this very cool VR experience, but 10 New York City marathons and 20 marathons overall. It's a very great achievement. Alex, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
And that's going to do it for this Wednesday edition of SI Now. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. Until then, stick with SI.com, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter at SI Now Live. Have a great afternoon.